Oh wow, eh? That is a nice workbench. You know, you can't have a fine Roubo without some undercoating, don't you know? Hey, welcome back to the Renaissance Woodworker, episode number 44, where we start to work on the undercoating for our bench. Hi everybody, welcome back. My sick and disturbing attempt at a North Dakotan Fargo accent probably didn't go over very well. Anyway, I made a promise a couple podcasts ago that I was going to try to keep these episodes in the 15 to 20 minute range, and I'm going to go ahead and break that promise this week. I did a lot of work on the mortises and tenons for the undercarriage of the Roubo bench, and there was a lot of good video I took, about twice the 30-minute range on this podcast now, and I did my best to edit it out, but I thought there were some pretty good points in a lot of this footage, and I didn't want to limit it all, and I didn't want to break it into two parts. So I apologize for the size of the download, but I hope that you think that some of this information was just as vital and not worth editing out. So let's head on down to the shop and get to work on Monsieur Roubo.
Hey everybody, it's time to get back to Roubo. So I am ready to start cutting mortises in the legs for my bench here. And what I've done is just set them onto the bench kind of in the orientation I want them. This is going to be the front of my bench out here and the back of my bench. I've got the legs marked, front left, front right. I've got the outward face marked on all four legs. And I'm just going to go around and start laying out the locations for the mortises. I went ahead and laid out the locations for one of the mortises. I do want them 5 inches up from the ground, and then they're going to be put in a way so that the front of the stretchers are flush with the front. Went ahead and drilled out one mortise all the way down here in the end. You can see just using a 1.5 inch Forstner bit. Made 3 or 4 passes in there and got it nice and smooth along the edges, and I'll need to go back and chisel out the corners there. But let me show you what I got set up on the drill press. Over here is my drill press, and I've got a fence put in place here that will register the long side of the mortise, and there's a stop block here and a stop block clamp down here, and that basically will register either end of the mortise. This way I get a repeatable cut, and I can make sure that all the mortises are at the proper depth, or rather the proper height from the floor. So I'll slip a leg in here, slide it in place, and that will drill out the top of the mortise. And then when I push it down to the other stop block, it'll drill out the bottom of the mortise. And the good news is that the short stretchers are referenced at the same height from the floor. So I'll use this same setup. Alright everybody, you need to finish up these mortises in the legs. My benchtop drill press actually only has a travel on the quill of 2 inches, and these mortises need to be 2.5 inches deep. So I was trying to figure out a way that I could raise up the stock and embed the bit in the stock a little bit to get it 2.5 inches deep, but it just wasn't going to work because I needed to have room to clear the chips. I needed to be able to move the drill around in there without changing the settings and stuff. It was just making things way too difficult. So I brought it over here onto the bench top, and I've got a 1.25 inch bit in my brace here, and I'm literally just doing it the old-fashioned and sweat breaking way. Now this is a huge bit, and I've got a 10-inch brace here, so I probably could stand to use a little bit more leverage. Maybe a 12-inch brace would be easier, but I don't have to go that deep. And in fact, if you continually will back it out and clear out the chips, I'm almost a 1/2 inch deep in there right now. So what I've got to do is make it 3 passes. I can get the length of this mortise to get it down to depth, and then we'll go back with a mortising. This is one of my mortising chisels, and put it on my layout lines here, and I'll use this just to basically mark the corners. I'm not actually doing any significant chiseling with it. It's mainly just to score those lines there so that I can come back with a bench chisel later and remove the bulk of the waste. And once I've got those scored, start with a mortising chisel, because there's a fair amount of junk. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and relieve a little bit of this edge, just so that I'm not risking banging it up here. I don't want to disturb the shoulder. And mortising chisel is a little less than delicate. There. So now I've relieved the shoulder a fair amount. And now I'll start back from the edge with the bevel facing me. Work my way down there. Work back just a little bit more. That's got most of that corner out there, so let's turn around with the bevel facing the other direction. Back it up just a little bit. And one more. Jumped off the line a little bit there. Alright. And then just using a bench chisel, I'll go back in here and pare a little bit to those lines. And long and short of it is, if you follow me over here, say hi to Alex on the floor there. Say hi, Alex. There he is. Alright, over here on the floor, as soon as we clear the dog toys out of the way, is the first mortise that I fit. And got a nice good fit against the front. Got a tiniest bit that I need to flush up, but it is secure all the way around, and it's a good fit. The nice thing about the size of this joinery is that the pieces are so heavy in and of itself that they fit together nice and snug. And you can double check that you're square, and I am square there. So I just need to go back and finish off all these mortises for 7 more mortises, and I'll be ready to assemble and draw bore the structure. So now we've got mortises cut in all the spaces and all 4 legs. In fact, this is the one of the front legs. This is the front right leg. Yeah, the one with the dog holes on it. And as you can see, this is the mortise for the long stretcher, and I've got a mortise for the end stretcher right here. And when I originally started building this bench, I wasn't exactly sure how wide I wanted it. It was going to end up being. Basically, as I milled the stock for the top, I jointed it and planed it and just planed it to the maximum thickness the board would allow. And just due to imperfections and things in the various stocks, some boards were thinner and some were thicker than others. So once I got them all laminated together, then I would take, stock, no pun intended, of what the final width would be. Now I still have to actually glue the front laminate in place, and it needs to be dovetailed into the end cap there. But I've clamped it all together, and I can determine now that the bench top is 26 1/8 inches wide. So now I'm able to determine how long my end stretchers need to be. And if you remember way back when I made these, the long stretchers, these were laminated up, and the tenons were built right into that lamination process. When I laminated the same 2 1 1/4 inch thick pieces together to make these stretchers, I just went ahead and cut them off on the ends and made them square, thinking I would cut the tenons later. So, because again, I didn't know exactly what the length of these tenons would be. So with 26 and an 1/8 inch wide, 2 5-inch thick legs, that leaves us with 16 and an 1/8 inch space between the two legs, and a 10.5 inch, or excuse me, a 2.5 inch tenon on both ends that adds another 5 inches. So the finished length here is going to be 21 and an 1/8 inches. So I'll cross cut both of these stretchers to length, just using the table saw and a miter sled. And actually this one, I'll need to rip it first. I haven't squared up all the edges on this particular one yet. But once I cross cut them, then using a marking gauge and the mortises that we already have in place here. So this is the back of that leg, and the short tenon will run out of it from here. And again, I want the edge of the tenon to be flush with this face. So using my marking gauge, I'll set the distance from the front edge to the inside edge of the mortise that's already been cut, and we'll simply scribe the length all the way around all 3 sides of this tenon. And then I'll take the 2.5 inch length, mark it along the front edge here, 2.5 inches, then square it up, cut the scribe line from there, and then on the table saw, using a square toothed blade, I'll run the end stretcher along and score the shoulder line on the stretcher. Once I've done that, I'll be able to go over to the bandsaw and set up the rip fence so that I can cut the cheek of that tenon, and I'll stay just outside the line so that I've got a little bit of room to flush it up with the shoulder plane. So now the tenons have been cut on the end stretchers on both ends here, and I brought the legs back over to the bench and set them up in the orientation that they will go once the undercarriage is completely assembled. And just here on the bench is just a few of the tools that I use for fitting tenons, basically. I've got a couple of squares that I use. I'll be using this hold fast just to hold the legs in place and the tenons in place when I'm working on them. For trimming the cheeks, I will use a large shoulder plane. This is a 1 1/8 inch wide Veritas large shoulder plane. This paring chisel, this is a 2 inch wide paring chisel, extremely useful for working along the edges of tenons, or possibly the walls of a mortise. Sometimes I find it's easier to actually shave the mortise than it would be the tenon itself. I've got a 1 inch bench chisel here. This is for pounding and such. This is a 35-degree bevel on this, whereas the paring is at a 20-degree bevel. And then I do have one of these mortise face floats that I got from Lee Nielsen, and this is one of the push variety, cuts on the push stroke. And I find this is really, really helpful for trimming up the walls of the mortise. And I can drive it down in there and just very, very lightly fine-tune the fit. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to move some of these parts out of the way so that we can get a better shot of things. I've actually already fit this particular mortise, and it's a good fit. And I'll go ahead and trim this other leg over here, this front leg, and take it from there. Nice sturdy fits. So let's move these tools out of the way. And I'll set the leg down. And what I've done is mark all the faces. That's nice and steady. These are holdfast from Phil Koons and his Russian friend Jake Pogrebiensky, which I apologize, Jake, I probably just butchered the pronunciation of your name there. So I've got the insides of each leg marked, and I've got the outward face and the top of each leg marked, so I know the orientation it needs to go. And this is so close, so close. I've got a good fit along the width of the tenon, and that's the way I wanted it. I didn't want to have to do too much paring along those end grain faces, because again, there's really not a whole lot of glue shrink on the end grain here. Where the shrink comes from is the long grain faces along the cheeks, and that's where it is the tightest right now. So based on, let me get a straight edge here, the thing we have to think about when it comes to trimming either the tenon cheeks or the mortise walls is where do we want the finished piece to end up. And in this instance, it's designed so that this face is going to be flush to the outside of the bench. So if we take a straight edge and line it up here, you can see that I've got it dead on where it needs to be. So if I were to trim too much off of this face, I would this would no longer be flush with the front. If I trim too much of this face, it's going to affect the flushness as well. So there's really very little that needs to come off, and I think what I'll end up doing is making just a few light passes along the back wall of the mortise with this paring chisel. And again, paring chisels, do not hit them with a hammer. That very light bevel angle would break that edge right off, and it would just be no good for you. Let's try this fit one more time. So close, so close. So let me take a few very light passes right down here at the end. And actually, let me get another hold fast. What I want to do check the camera angle here, make sure you guys can see that. What I want to do on the very tip of this tenon is just trim a tiny little bit. Trim just that little bit and see what that does to the fit. Just about. Let me do the same thing on the other side. I think that's going to be our best way to do this. With these mortises being so long, coming in here with a paring chisel like this is definitely going to help, but because the mortise is quite a bit longer than my chisel, it's difficult to get consistency across that face, and I think I could get a more consistent cut with the shoulder plane just working across this way. And let's face it, this Veritas plane is set to an extremely high tolerance, so I know that it's going to keep a face flat, whereas I can't quite guarantee it with my chiseling technique. Alright, that is about the fit we need. I probably need to take the tiniest little sliver off from there to get it to be a little bit more of a piston fit. Remember, I'm going to go back and draw bore these joints, so if I get just a little bit too loose, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you know, I do still want really good long grain and long grain contact throughout. Let me take this out, and what I'm seeing is when I take a straight edge here along this face, I can see where I'm actually binding, because this wall of the mortise here is not actually flat. And I'll reference my chisel in here, and I can see that I've got a little bit of a bow right in the center. And that's probably what's binding things up more than anything else. So I'll go down here with this face float, and this is where this tool is really helpful, because it takes off, well, it can be a very aggressive tool, but it also can be very delicate. Get a really clean face there too, by the way. Alright, yes, that's the fit I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is come back here with the shoulder plane and take this little edge that I planed down, and I'm going to bring it back to the same thickness all the way back to the shoulder here, and then I'll get, hopefully, a perfect fit. Okay, I've still got a little bit of binding here. What I'll do is tap it with the mallet a little bit and pull it back out. And this is a technique to see where it's actually binding on the mortise. What you're going to do is look for spots where the wood is burnished, where you can see that it's binding against the mortise wall. And this is an opportunity where, or this is an example where overhead fluorescent lights, like we've got in my shop right now, may not be the best way to see it. So what I'll do, grab a flashlight, and just like you would in finishing, throw a raking light along that surface, and I can see I've got a burnish mark here right on the tip, and a burnish mark right here in the center. So that tells me that, remember this wall that was slightly bowed, probably going to need to take a little bit more off there with the face float, and I'll need to make another pass right on the tip here with the shoulder plane, and that ought to get the fit together perfectly. So let's see what we can do to fix that. Let's go back with the face float. I'll get a little bit more aggressive. The leading tooth of this float can be extremely aggressive. If you kind of angle that first tooth into the wood and push through it, it'll take off a lot of wood. And then once you get kind of close to the cut where you think you want it, that's where I'll take the pressure off that front tooth, and I'll put a little bit more pressure along the main part, the middle of the cutting tool here, and it will even up any cut that you just made. Alright. Fit is really good width-wise, but I'm still getting some binding here, so let's do the burnishing technique again. And I think, yep, what I've got happening now is actually a little bit of burnishing on the edges here. And here's where I'll use a combination square. I've got the fit along the cheeks nice, but I'll take a combination square and drop it down into the mortise. And you can check to see how square are the side walls of the mortise. And I think pretty good. Yep, I've got a little bump down at the very bottom. It looks like a spot where as I was squaring up the corners, I didn't get it straight all the way down. And I felt something over on this side too. And yeah, sure enough, this mortise on this side has a slight slant inwards. So although as I'm test fitting near the walls, it looks really, really good, but as the tenon slides down in there, I'm getting some binding along the edges. So again, this is an instance where we could take some more off the mortise and taper the tenon itself, but I'd rather not do that. I'd rather keep it as square as possible. So what I'll go in, and using the square, I can very easily check the plumbness of the mortise walls. So that's where I can either use the face float, or a lot of times, these are really, really sharp chisels. I find it's just easier to go in pare that back. And actually, as I look down into this mortise, I can see a slight belly in the middle of the mortise wall, and that's actually from the original Forstner bit when I drilled these out. So it's obvious to me that what I need to do is cut these walls back so that belly actually disappears from that mortise, and that'll be the key to know that I've got it straight down, because there is no belly mark from that Forstner bit near the top of the wall. We've already established that I've got a good fit up there. And anchor this down so I'm not sliding all over the place. Okay, I've gotten rid of much of that belly on this side. The other thing, don't underestimate the sensitivity of your fingers. Just running your finger down the edge, it's amazing how much you can see. I can feel rather, that I've got a slight bump right here. This chisel cuts really well, and I'm getting a kind of a particularly smooth surface. It's hard to get a grip on it, so I'm going to go back in with a face float. Pull a little bit of that out. And sometimes you just got to rock the chisel a little bit to get the cut started. Okay. The fit one more time here. All right, I think, oh, so close, so close. Obviously still got a little bit of binding at the bottom. And actually, let's check for burnishing marks. Yeah, a few burnishing marks along the edge there. For the most part, it's so close. I think I'm just dealing with kind of sloppy work on my part when it came to squaring up these corners. So let me go ahead, make sure I've got these corners square. What I'll keep doing is using the flat back of my chisel to check these corners, and that's the best way I know of to see, you know, are we on there, are we off, and yeah, I've got a little issue here. So let me continue doing this rather than spending a bunch of time just fine-tuning here in front of the camera. If nothing else, you guys are learning that my joinery definitely does not go together right off the machine. Far from it. And you know, maybe that's just me really wanting to play with my hand tools. It's just an excuse to play with my hand tools maybe. But you know, this is definitely trial and error. What I find though is the more I do here, the faster they go. So by the time I get to the third and fourth fitting, it'll probably go really, really fast because I know I'll be able to identify where they're binding. And that's really the secret to this, is where is the tenon binding, so you trim that spot and don't mess with any other spot. Make sure that you're not taking off too much in one spot, because then you don't end up with a very good fit. Well, here we are. Got all the joints fit, tested. They're all good, snug, strong fits. The joint you saw me working on was actually this joint back here. I'm sorry, this joint right here. And when we last saw, I was having a little bit of trouble getting it to seat perfectly. And actually, the fit felt really, really good, but for some reason it wasn't coming flush to the front. And it suddenly occurred to me that I probably hadn't drilled the mortise deep enough. So I pulled out the bracing bit and took like another 1/8 of an inch depth out of it. Went in and cleaned up the corners with the chisel, and now it fits smoothly. So this end of the stretcher is in place, and what I'll do is come over here and start assembling this part. Both of these fit nice and snugly. Except for the fact that I'm trying to put the stretcher in upside down, or backwards that is. let's do it the right way, shall we? Good fit. This is the hard part, is getting it all assembled, because each piece is so heavy to move around. So I guess if there were any advice, it might be that you'd want to make these joints almost a little bit loose so that you can actually get them together. So now the long stretchers. I'm not going to seat that one fully yet because I've got to get this front stretcher in. Over here. Coaxing, check for square. It is square there. Square there. Good. Good. All right. So that is the undercarriage of the bench, and it is set up in the orientation that will be in the finished bench. I've got dog holes set up on this side. My leg vise will be down on this side again because I'm left-handed. And sliding vise here, I'm going to go ahead and route the groove on both sides so I can move the sliding vise over here. I probably will go ahead and put dog holes on the back legs just because it's going to be so much easier to put the dog holes on before I assemble the bench when I can work on the leg horizontally like I did this one. I may or may not ever use them, you never know, but they don't do anything to the structural integrity of the leg, and it's certainly, you know, it's nice to get it done now, so I'll probably go ahead and do that. But from here, I had done a little bit of tweaking on the mortise walls like you saw, and then I actually decided why not put my bench to use, and I moved my work down to this end, and with a nice long bench I was able to move these end stretchers down here to the bench crafted vise, and just using my shoulder plane did some shaving, and I had a much better holding there. I was able to get a much more accurate cut there. So that was really all I had to do for these other three joints, was really shave the tenon just a little bit, and it slid in nicely. This joint was just particularly fussy because it wasn't at the right depth at first and had some unevenness in the walls. But ultimately there's a bunch of different ways to trim your mortise and tenons to fit nicely. Really, this is a big step because we now have legs to put this on. So what I'm going to do is finish up leveling the bottom of the base, at least in the parts where the joinery meets. Then I'll go into getting the huge mortises set for the tops of these legs. So that being said, that'll do it for the week. I appreciate you guys watching. Coming up in a little more than a month is Woodworking America, the design conference out in the Chicago area. I will be there, as I've told you before, so please send me an email with anything you specifically want me to cover, anybody you want me to grab and maybe talk to and interview while I'm out there. I do have the press pass, so I'll be bouncing around and trying to get as many photos and as many interviews and just meet as many people as I can. So it should be a good event, and thanks again for watching. We'll get back to Roubo in the coming weeks.